Okay, cool. Thank you everybody for being here tonight. So this is the Monday readings of Comrade Kwame's book, and since we're all members of the 2RC Second Rainbow Coalition, we usually start most of the readings with a statement of unity. So I will go ahead and start. And the statement of unity says that the legacy of the First Rainbow Coalition dates back to its founding on April 4, 1969, by the original BPP, Black Panther Party, the original Young Lords, and the Young Patriots organization. A number of other organizations joined this coalition not too long afterwards, such as the American Indian Movement, Brown Berets, Rising Up Angry, the Red Guards, and others. Since the founding of the United States, the masses had developed a number of popular movements that came together to fight back against this capitalist, imperialist system in various ways around particular demands. Nonetheless, none had established a movement quite like the first Rainbow Coalition. This historic movement was the first of its kind that established a model of class struggle like no other. Its charismatic leader, Chairman Fred Hampton of the Illinois chapter of the original Black Panther Party, stated at the end of the day, we weren't engaged in a race struggle. He said that it's a class struggle, goddammit. By uniting the various oppressed ethnicities and masses, they were able to bridge the gap between the various ethnic communities that white supremacy had long sought to keep divided. This class solidarity equipped them with the material basis and class consciousness to see their common class condition. Therefore, the necessity to form a united front against their common class oppressor, the capitalist imperialist ruling class. The ruling class viewed this as the greatest threat to their class rule, and subsequently used the entire repressive forces of the state, police, courts, jails, prisons, and intelligence agencies, etc., in order to crush this emerging revolutionary socialist movement. We're founded, we refounded the Rainbow Coalition on May 14th, 2021, with the intent of upholding the legacy of the original Rainbow Coalition. We believe that this historic example is the model for the United Front that will best serve our class liberation. By upholding the 10-point program of the original Black Panther Party, which was subsequently adopted and later expanded by the original Young Lords, Young Patriots organization, and all other Rainbow Coalition members, we establish our programmatic unity. The six disciplinary rules that we uphold ties all our organizations in our coalition to a common professional discipline. History has bestowed upon our generation a common class mission to fulfill. The representatives of the capitalist imperialist ruling class, represented by Democratic Party and Republican Party, cannot liberate us. It is their class intentions and interests to uphold our common class oppression. Therefore, it is only we, the oppressed masses of all ethnicities and nationalities, who must build the necessary class solidarity, class consciousness, organizational structures, and a united front that will ultimately liberate ourselves. This is what the Sacred Rainbow Coalition is committed to. This is the historic mission we intend to fulfill. Dare to struggle, dare to win. All power to the people, boots on the ground. Amen. Welcome to church. All right,
And everybody
comrades. So
said
we're starting
amen.
on chapter 20 of Comrade's book, and we're actually almost towards the end. So what I'll do is I'll read along, and then if anybody else wants to read along or has anything to say, just lift your hands up. I kind of do a little bit of I change things up in terms of the way I like to read. Is I like to read stuff, stop, and then we talk about it, and then continue reading stuff, stop, and then talk about it. Uh, because as I've mentioned before in other readings, and I've even mentioned this to Conway, Kwame, is that this book is interesting in that, even though it was just written a few years ago, almost everything that we experience as an oppressed people, class struggle, that comes to fruition in the book, we can still talk about now. Like nothing's really changed. Should it? Yes, it probably should, but nothing's really changed. And so, with that being said, as we read along, I like sometimes stopping and just um, talking about different things that come to light in the book, and hearing other people's opinions on certain things as well too. So with that being said, I will go ahead and get started. Chapter 20, if you're in the book, it's on page 225, and it starts as a real life black hole. I was on the range with Buddy and LB for about 3 or 4 months before they realized that they had placed separate on Buddy and I years ago, prohibiting us from being on the same range together. We knew that it was going to eventually happen. We made the most of it. I was subsequently moved to A West Side for the SHU and would be moved to various cells for the next several years. When Barack Obama ended up winning the Democratic Party's presidential primaries in 2008, defeating Hillary Clinton, I remember that being the talk on the SHU. Everybody was surprised, including me. We all figured that Hillary Clinton was bound to win and become the 44th president of the United States. When that didn't happen and Barack became the one to run against John McCain, I remember everybody in the world was paying close attention to who would win that presidential race, even all the guys on the SHU. Dudes who had never given two fucks about politics were paying attention. It seemed like everybody had developed political philosophies and had become political pundits. Everywhere you turned, people were talking about the change you could believe in, quote unquote, and quote, yes, we can, end quotes. So that was just the first two chapters, and it's already hitting heartstrings with me. Um, I'm fortunate that I live in a state where we have multiple parties. We have like a Green Party, and I remember there's been an individual by the name of Mark Charles, who's a Native American brother, who's been on the ticket for many times. There's also been a doctor, I forgot her name, but I remember the
Oh,
brother that ran with her as vice president on the Green Party was Dr. Barack Amaju. I forget his last name. Um, and I remember that not that any one party or even two or three parties, there's other places that have many, multiple parties. But I remember that one particular set of candidates within the Green Party. I remember people that had gone to like Standing Rock were talking about them because they had chained themselves up to like some mind moving equipment in an act of solidarity for climate change activists or whatever. And I had never heard anybody else done that. Um, but in terms of Barack Obama, that was the first time I ever voted for a Democrat. And I'm sad to say that, I knew obviously that both the Democratic and the Republican Party wouldn't have anything for us. A lot of people would say, well, you're just throwing away your vote if you vote for the Green Party because they don't have enough power instilled on the local and the state levels. But, I felt like that was the lesser of evils and so forth. And it was interesting because it was the first time I voted for a Democrat, but then uh, years afterwards, I actually felt guilty about it. As we all know, they called him the deporter in chief, right? And I was like,
mhm,
man, if anybody that should have known the struggle would have been this man, this brother, right? That there was that whole birther conspiracy about him and so forth. And then it was just even more painfully evident that Democrats, we all know that Republicans aren't going to do anything for us, but especially Democrats wouldn't do anything for us. And I hate to say it, but even now with President Biden, it's still even more evident. I mean, I don't even think a two, three, or four political system would do anything for us. I mean, there's other nations where they have multiple. Whether or not this nation would ever get there, I don't know. I doubt it. But I always come to the fact that I remember a Native American brother said that the laws that this nation were built on, and if you know people, and I think Ralphie will understand where I'm coming from, if you know people that have studied history and law and so forth, a lot of the like the grammar, like the actual law language is Greek and Latin based. That's already European centric. And then, of course, we already know what the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence says about folks like myself that are either native or Chicano, or for those that want to use that term, Latin or whatever, right? So
yeah.
if a nation is built with laws that didn't have us in mind, would it ever work in our favor? And I think that was for me painfully apparent after I voted for this brother, and then hearing things that were happening, sending drones across different countries in the Middle East and bombing people from afar and so forth. Not that war would have been any better, but it was just different things that were coming to fruition that I was like, man, it totally is apparent that the two-party system won't work for us. I mean, you could even argue maybe the three or four-party system. I'm curious how the panel feels about that because just those two paragraphs, I know for me it already hit heartstrings.
I'd like to add something, brother, if I
Yeah,
may.
please do.
Um, so the the slogan of "Yes, we can" is is what got me. Um, so we know that "Yes, we can" comes from the slogan "Si se puede," which really was the rallying cry of the farm workers movement, and so it really and without getting ahead of ourselves, it really spoke to multiple audiences. The slogan of the change you could believe in, um, and Brother Kwame goes into that here in the next few pages. But for me, it was the yes we can, si se puede. Um, just even what a slogan, what something like that could do for a person just hearing it, and just like you just summed up, it sounded good. um, I too voted for Obama. It was the only time that I voted. And ironically for me, um, it what got me was the "Yes, we can, si se puede" slogan. Along with it was just that, but that was a big thing for me, that part. um, and at the end of that 8 period, you know it was like my slogan became "Never again." you know Never again will I fall for this shit. you know so it went from, and I still believe yes we can, si se puede, but I just know that se va a poder de otra manera. It's going to be a different way. It's not going to be through that two-party, three, four, system. It's not going to be through that.
Yeah, no, you're right. Well said, hermana. Well said. Comrade Shamako, you have your hand up, brother. What do you want to say?
Yeah, mic check. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Word. So in 2004, some of you guys might remember the National Hip Hop Political Convention. I want to say that it took place in New Jersey, and then there was a second one. I think that was 2008 in Chicago. So in 2008, I was president and executive director of an organization called Hip Hop Congress, and during that year, Cynthia McKinney and Rosa Clemente were running for, sorry, I'm driving, running for president and vice president of the Green Party. I don't know if anybody remembers this.
Yeah, I remember it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember it.
So the thing was that while Obama was running as the first Black president and Hillary was running as the first woman president, Cynthia McKinney was running as the first Black woman, right?
Mm.
And Rosa Clemente, obviously being an organizer who was one of the founding members of the National Hip Hop Political Convention, and who sort of came out of hip hop organizing. We had a pretty, excuse my car. We had a pretty uh, functional, maybe strong working relationship with her at the time. But we also, obviously, being in hip hop, had a bunch of people who were really excited about the Obama campaign. And so organizationally, we kind of ran both lines. As an individual, I was definitely pro Green Party. I wrote an article in 2008. I want to say it was called "Barack is the New OJ." Barack Obama is the new OJ. I think that's what it was called. And the point of the article was that at least in Black circles, people were getting excited about Barack Obama for no reason other than he was Black, like
Mm.
like the O.J. Simpson trial, right? Like your ass ain't getting out of jail. Your son ain't getting out of jail. You know what I'm saying? Like I mean, it. There's a reality to, like, when Obama won. When Obama won, my dad was there and my mom cried. And that's real. Like, their feelings are real. So I don't want to downplay that. And I mean, Obama was an imperialist from the start. He never even tried to hide it. You know what I mean? So, you know, as time moved forward in 2012, we worked with the Jill Stein, Sherry Honkler campaign. So I don't know how many of you guys know this, but Sherry Honkler was actually a vice presidential candidate, is Poor People's Army, for the Green Party in 2012. And, you know, we've continued to support the Green Party work since then. And, you know, like, look, we can say what we want politically, but the reality is Obama was a smooth dude, man. You know, like, he was a really difficult, like, I did not like his policies, but if he was like, hey, let's go have a beer, I'd go. You know what I mean? Like,
He
was
just charmed you
you
to
know what I
death.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, it's tricky because, you know, like Lobo said, like, I remember, like, Jill Stein caught and continues to catch a lot of flack as a spoiler. And it's weird because, like, what people never talk about is, you know, Sherry and Jill Stein getting arrested and locked in a room for like an hour and a half, 2 hours during the debates in 2012. Like, nobody talks about that part. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But, you know, like, the no third party has ever really even had the space to grow like that. They crush it before it can, and then blame it for ruining a non-real a non-real political system. So anyway, that's it. I gotta focus on the road, pass.
No, you bring up really good points. I forgot all about that with Dr. Joe Stein. That's who I was referring to in the Green Party. And you know, history tells us that even though you have a set of laws and institutions like the government, the Senate, all that crap, the Congress, we have done it before. I mean, Veronica Rafa can tell you that with La Raza Unida Party in Texas, in the Southwest, the racist of all racist states, they were actually able to form their own political identity and their political party, and they rose to power within that template of white supremacy and these weird laws and organizations and so forth. They were able to do it. Sometimes I'm hopeful that it can happen again because it's very evident, and well, at least with us like-minded comrades, that capitalism is the root of all evil. So then, like, what's next, right? There's talk on, do we do socialism? Do we do communism? Do we do some other form of government? Do we just erase everything, start all over? But I think it's apparent that the root is capitalism. And then once people start thinking about that, then that's when you can start sowing the seeds in. And the little bit of history that I know about La Raza Unida Party, if you look at old video footage, they were very blunt. And they would tell you, like, the Democrats aren't going to do shit for us. Like, they literally would say that, right? And so are the Republicans, and so they had their own platform, and they were successful until, you know, in my opinion, they were sabotaged. Rafa, you have your hand up, brother. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the way you're having this discussion. Or why I think too that, you know, with the book and Kwame and to his surprise, everybody talking about and quoting Obama, right? As he rose up. That's interesting because for a long time I didn't vote at all. I didn't even believe in it. I pretty much was an anarchist in college, I would have to say. But at the same time, I come to realize that, and as a history teacher too, you know, it's in our blood. It's what we do. We've always voted. Like you said, capitalism and money, especially money, plays a big role in American elections and elections around the world. And when you take money out and you leave the people power, you can see some serious change. And I that's why I believe at the local level, and everybody from the young lords to, you know, like you said, Raza Unida, even the Black Panther Party has proven that at a local level, you can take back communities, and we have people power. As long as there's that money though that creeps in, we see a lot of damage being done. And I know when I go to Cuba, you know, they vote, and a lot of people don't think that they vote, but they literally vote. And what you don't see over there is ads, bombardment of ads, or money, you know, people funding, you know, ads or campaigns or politicians, because they don't allow that. And it makes total sense. When you eliminate money, you have a more honest, you know, I would say, electorate or population that votes or speaks out. Even in Cuba, they still oppose the government. They badmouth the government, the people, but they vote, and they live with the consequences, the results, and there's no confusion. Everybody knows what they got to do. And I admire that because it's a lot more honest than what we got here, if you think about it. And, you know, the other thing was interesting is I met the president on 2 occasions. Last occasion I was there, it was for the 26th of July celebration. And throughout, before the actual presentation, when he came on and spoke to the people at this university, they kept playing videos and videos of Fidel and others. And what's interesting, and Veronica brought up, yes, we can, si se puede, and it's true. It started with Dolores Huerta and the farm workers, as we know. But in these videos, in these films, it was the 1970s and 80s, and they were saying si se puede. And I was
Right.
like, wait a minute, timeline is, wait a minute. And if you go back to
Interesting.
those 1970s and 80s videos, you will see the slogan "Si se puede" in Spanish. They never said it in English. It was translated on the screen as "Yes, we can." And I was rolling. I
Right.
was like, oh my gosh, it goes deeper than we even know, because the farm workers, they took a lot of them. They had activists, organizers, the Farm Workers Union. And I'm sure somebody heard it somewhere, but I saw them last time I was in Cuba, those old videos, old films, and they were saying "Si se
Mhm.
puede," which is
Right.
surprising to me.
That's kind of cool.
Mhm.
That just goes to show you the impact that movements have. Like for it to
Mhm.
carry from the Southwest and for Chicanismo to hit, our Cuban brothers and sisters in the socialista country, like that's actually kind of refreshing. Like it's cool. It's interesting. I'm gonna kind of divert off topic here, and then I'm gonna continue reading because Ralphie and Veronica are exactly 100% true when that phrase "si se puede," when the farm workers kind of helped coin it, or even if they didn't coin it, they obviously popularized it. That flag behind me, that red flag, shout out to Juana Mezcua from the San Bernardino Brown Berets in California, who's always representing that flag with his family in Mexico and in California. But that's a reproduction of the flag that they had, right? Interestingly enough, I often wonder when movements aren't successful if the roots go deeper than we think. And with that being said, when roots go deep, if sabotage isn't sometimes done. If you ever look at old Mexica, old Taino, old Aztec, old pre-Columbian symbols, you will see symbols that almost look like the Nazi swastika, but it's turned a little bit. I had somebody make a comment that my UFW flag almost looked like a Nazi eagle flag. And I had somebody make a comment that, the term La Raza, right? La Raza Unida or La Raza or whatever, which means the race in Spanish, was coined by a white supremacist Mexican uh, educator way back when. And you know what? It's true. And I think the reason why that happened was sabotage. Those symbols were ancient symbols that our people used for many years before any Nazi in Germany decided to, critique it or twist it to their idea. And then the terms that we used, other people that have the far right wing ideas will grab that and twist that back. So I usually tell folks, well, if you know that, then why aren't you taking it back? Then
Mm.
you, as a brown person, use that word "la raza," and you take it to mean whatever you want it to mean. Like, don't just stand for that. Like, oh, it was used as a white. Whenever you see the Nazi swastika, go back and look at a Mexica war symbol. It's literally the same symbol, except the swastika is turned, and the Mexica war symbol has a little curvature at the end. The Nazis, they took the book Jim Crow laws. They took everything literally that was oppressive to most minority people in the United States and founded their Nazi ideology on that. So of course, anything that is sacred to indigenous people, they're gonna twist and they're gonna pervert. At least that's my opinion. But yeah, it's just interesting how whenever there's movements that gain traction, and you look at how far it goes, you can almost see almost sabotage in every movement, right? And honestly, with that being said, I remember the first time I very ever voted for a Democrat, thinking, "Oh man, this is great. He's going to be the first Black president. He's going to do so much change. His speeches are very well informed. He's going to do so much good." But I wonder they're going to set him up. And I mean, like Kamran Shamako even said, there were some things that he was just very blatant about and adamant about. And I felt a little bit foolish for voting, but that's past tense. Sometimes you just have to move forward, and then like it's very apparent that in terms of class struggle, none of the parties are going to help us out, especially the left and right wing, the Republicans and the Democrats. And in the comments there's it says a red, black, and white is the color of the Nazi flag, but those colors, like you said, were appropriate. Exactly that. Appropriation. Exactly that. And that was done in the 40s. Actually, no, even before that, because there were two world wars the Nazis were involved in, World War One and World War Two. So that was done in the 1900s. And we just talk about cultural appropriation now, but that's been going on for years for some of us, right? All right, I'm gonna go ahead and continue, and then we'll chat some more because I'm sure there's gonna be some really interesting other subjects that are gonna come up to fruition. Paragraph number 3, page 225. If I hadn't gone to prison and become a communist, he may have been the first and only person I had ever voted for because he did bring a freshness to American politics. He had a way of making you feel that he could help change the plight of blacks and the poor, and that made the more quote unquote perfect union. That was something that he was destined to deliver to the oppressed and downtrodden. I was impressed in the way that he had bridged the gap between sections of the American population that had formerly been divided or made to feel excluded. Before him, I hadn't seen any president speak about legacies of racism and how its systemic effects still persisted today. He was the first presidential candidate that I witnessed speak to some of the issues in the LGBTQI plus community and try to bridge the gap between the heterosexual and the LGBTQ community. As for science, Barack was the first president to openly talk about his acceptance of the theory of evolution as a scientific fact, but he did so in a way that tended not to alienate specific people of faith. His ability to find the middle road between desperate communities was something that gave him the mainstream appeal to win over the people and their belief that he was the best suited to referee this natural state, this neutral state. And like Comrade Shamako said, like he'd call him up, he'd go have a beer with him. I mean, the guy was smooth. He was a very well informed speaker. And I use those words on purpose because when you speak about something, you have to know the subject you're going to speak about, right? There's an old school club that people used to join back in the day called Toastmasters, right? So you make a toast, right? And Toastmasters was just a club for people that maybe because of their profession or because of school, whatever, they had to make speeches. So you would join this club and they would just give you like a subject and you had to go and research it and have a speech on it, right? But to be a well-informed speaker, not only did you have to know the subject you were speaking about, you had to know how to argue for and against it, right? So just imagine taking like a debate. It was almost like that, right? And again, not to champion the Democratic Party, but I think out of all the presidents, he had that down because he could sell any issue. He could, like the book says, bridge people together and I mean, he won 2 terms. I think solely because of that, just because of that skill, just because of that. And then we in the comments says we haven't talked about Michelle and the dynamic between the two of them as well and the charm. Yeah, that's right. Very much true. Very much true. However, by this time in my life, I had a very realistic understanding of the role of the presidential office and the nature of the state. I had read Frederick Engels' book, The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State, Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, and even the book by the godfather of capitalism, Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations. Oof. I was conscious of the fact that the state had emerged within human civilization in order to primarily serve a particular class's dictatorship. That's exactly 100% right. Almost, if I'm not even mistaken, all the writers of the Declaration of Independence were slaveholders, landowners, they were capitalists, right? I was aware that the police, military serve a particular class dictatorship. I was aware that the police, military, prisons, the courts, and intelligence agencies had emerged and become more specialized as time went on to maintain the wealth disparities that existed between those who owned the means of production and the means of distribution. Of course, that is in reference to the worker class struggle. Plantations, cattle ranches, feudal estates, manufacturing industries, corporations, financial institutions, etc. And those who labored for the rich, no matter if the rich class were slave masters, feudal lords, or capitalists. No state was neutral in the sense that it could serve the highest interests of all the members and classes throughout its society. If the socioeconomic base produced its wealth primarily through a slave labor force, then that state would uphold the highest interests of those slave masters by way of a class dictatorship of slave owners or representatives of that class dictatorship that promoted their class interests over the slaves and all other classes within that society. If the socioeconomic base produced its wealth primarily through a peasant labor force, then that state would uphold the highest interests of the feudal lords and nobility by way of a class dictatorship that reinforced feudalism. That's very apparent if you ever watch like old movies on like kings and queens and like feudal lords and stuff like that. I mean, that's pretty much the historical basis, right, where all that comes from. So I mean, if you don't really agree with what the comrade's saying there, watch Braveheart, watch like an old movie and then read up on it, and it's extremely apparent that that whole feudal lordship, that whole European idea, not only was it based on like a classist idealism, but I mean, that's what the quote unquote founding fathers came with in mind, right? If the socio-economic base produces wealth primarily through a proletariat workforce, a working class that sold its labor power for a number of hours to the capitalists and received compensation back in the form of wages, then that state would uphold the largest interests of the capitalist class by way of a class dictatorship that reinforced capitalism. Many times, those class dictatorships, instead of being run by the capitalists themselves, for instance, would have professional representatives of their class dictatorship, such as congressmen and women, governors, and presidents overseeing those states, which in fact serve the interests of that particular ruling class. Furthermore, to ensure the continuation of their class domination, every state had a repressive state. Every state had a repressive arm of the state, such as police, courts, prisons, military, and intelligence agencies, which that ruling class had a monopoly of power over to keep all the other class subordinates in their class rule. And to me, that right there was extremely apparent when it came to Standing Rock, the whole no dapple movement. I mean, you literally had a pipeline going through sacred burial grounds, which I thought article something of the Constitution, and I forget the name or the number, said that all land treaties between indigenous nations were rule of the land. But that was not apparent during the whole Standing Rock social movement, because on sacred burial grounds, they were trying to build a pipeline, and all people were doing were protesting and praying. Literally, there were shamans there, there were medicine men there, they were praying. And when I saw a very militant police force, I mean, it was a slap in the face that exactly what this says right here in this paragraph, page 226, that state force, that oppressive force, which were the cops, the pigs. And I actually think they had like some Blackwater type for hire military personnel, some kind of for hire law enforcement, as well as their own local. That, I mean, they were there just to protect the pipeline. They weren't there to keep the peace because it was a peaceful event, right? They were there particularly for that pipeline for capitalism. It was so apparent, at least for me. That was the real nature of the state. There was always a material class interest behind its existence and perpetuation. Ingalls wrote in The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State, and I quote, as the state arose from the need to hold class antagonisms in check, but also arose in the middle of the conflict of those classes, it is, as a rule, that the state most powerful, economically dominant class, which through the medium of the state becomes also the politically dominant class, and thus acquires new means of holding down and exploiting the oppressed class. Thus, the state of antiquity was above all the state and above owners for the purpose of holding down the slaves, as feudal state was the organ of the nobility for holding down the peasant serfs and bondsmen, and the modern representative state as an instrument of exploitation of wage labor by capital, end quote. Damn. And that's a direct quote right there. I'm gonna stop right quick. Does anybody have anything to say about that? I mean, it sucks to read it in black and white because I think for us it's very apparent, right? Like we all know. Um, Yeah, it's literally verbatim. I'm gonna go ahead and continue reading, and I'll look to see if anybody has their hands up. They want to uh, jive in and say something. Even Adam Smith, the godfather of capitalism, has expressed the same basic fact about the nature of the state when he wrote that, and I quote, civil government, so far as it's instituted for the security of property, is in reality instituted for the defense of the rich against the poor, or those who have some property against those who have none at all. God, I forgot about that. I remember trying to read a version of that book, and I remember getting so angry and I couldn't. And I remember I felt like I needed to. And this just, man, it's painful to hear, but I mean, it's so evident in the way that our society as a classist society is based on, right? Before Marx and Engel or even Adam Smith, there were many philosophers and political theorists who proposed all kinds of fanciful, idealistic notions of the state, its origins, why it existed, or what the ideal state should look like. Plato's Republic envisioned the ideal state where the philosopher king would oversee it, and that the political and economic power had to be kept separated from each other, or else it would lead to corruption, dissension, and instability of that state. Plato failed to see those that wielded economic power also wielded political control over the state, and that could never be separated. Plato's ideal state only existed in his own mind. His view of the state ultimately came from his ideals of reality, consciousness, and the absolute, and how they must be reflected here on earth in order to achieve a good system of governance, quote unquote. Others, such as the political theorists like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, in his book, The Social Contract, theorized that the general will of the people must be enshrined into law in such a way that, quote unquote, good laws be the society together in their common interest. He believed that people were, quote unquote, inherently good, but it was the state that was corrupt. He assumed that if the state could come to reflect the common good of the people through the quote unquote good laws that reflected their common interests, then the contradiction could be rectified. Hmm. Like Plato, Rousseau failed to see that the class nature of the state and that there could never be a neutral state that could promote the common interests of the people as long as antagonistic classes existed. The failure to understand the origin of the state, as well as the underlying laws which govern the social and economic development of the state, historically caused many people, historically caused many political theoreticians to be short-sighted and idealistic. Yeah, they weren't very realistic at all, it seems like. What Charles Darwin's theory of evolution was to our understanding of the origin and later development of all life on Earth was to biology, was equivalent to Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity to our understanding of the origin and later development of the material universal, and what Marx and Engels' theory of historical materialism was to our understanding of the origin and later development of human civilization. You know, and I'm going to stop right there because to touch on civilizations, I'm kind of a nerd. And when I'm not reading something, I like looking at documentaries. I'm one of those weird people that 2 or 3 hours sleep, maybe even four sometimes, and I function on a full day. So if I'm not reading, I'm always watching documentaries or researching stuff. And that last word, human civilization, whenever you look at different quote unquote great civilizations, the Roman Empire, right? The Mayan, the Incan kingdom, any kind of like famous civilizations, they all had a form of money and a form of politics. And it's interesting how sometimes they are similar to different other countries and ethnicities and cultures. And then what I really like are the ones that are very apparent and they stand out. Like I remember reading about a Caribbean tribe that they had no notion of property and wealth. And so when when Christopher Columbus came, he was easily able to subdue them because like they didn't know. He would tell them like, here's, a sword or something. Give me, like all the all the grain of maize or whatever you have in your farm. And so they'd look and they'd be like, oh, well, this thing can cut. Sure, take it all. Like they didn't care. Like they thought they didn't have this concept of property. There wasn't even this concept of like trading for different things. It was such a humble concept of existence. Like you just grew what you needed to survive. And if somebody else needed it, you just like gave it to them. There was nothing needed in return and so forth. Um, and I don't know if we'll ever get to that as a world civilization, because I think inherently, because of capitalism, especially now with people that generations into it, we almost expect something, even if it's not like a monetary value. We almost expect something in return. Like if I do something for you, okay, cool, keep that in the back of your head. So whenever I need something, you do it for me, right? Instead of just doing that. And I often wonder if capitalism hasn't intrinsically rooted itself in all forms of different customs, traditions, religions. I used to be very anti-Christian until I read about I believe they're Catholic, maybe they're Protestant, but the plowshare workers or plowshare activists. So a plow is what oxen use to create a trench in a farm, right? And that's what people use to plant. And I remember the plowshare worker movement were a group of religious Christian activists that literally, like, they would break into nuclear bases, which is crazy because think about high level security that is. And they would splatter blood all over the nuclear missiles. A few of them chained themselves and would pray. And I thought, I understand my history and my connection to Catholic imperialism and so forth, and what the Spaniards brought with their disease and their foreign language and their different religion. But I could respect that, like in terms of peace and what they were practicing, what they preached in terms of what Jesus Christ would have done. I was like, that's pretty interesting. Like I've never heard of that. So I know the history. I myself am not Christian, but I stand in solidarity um with some folks that are, just simply because of that. But it often makes me wonder, even with that, how capitalism came into play. Because I remember growing up Catholic, we had to pay, I forgot what it's called, not dues, but like a tithing, right? You go to mass and then the plate comes around and you you got to put something in there, right? Um, so it's just little things like that. Like, if it wasn't for capitalism, would we ever have these thoughts of, if I do something for Che, if I do something for Rafa, what is he going to give me in return if it's not a dollar, if it's not that greenback, right? Go ahead, Comrade Che. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, in reference to in reference to ideas, how we think, we have a tendency of saying, well, this is how I am, this is how we were, this is how it used to be, and this is how it's always going to be, but that's it, within the confines of capitalism. If we go way back, I mean, way back, there were societies that didn't have no courts. There were no police. There were no
Right.
judges. People worked communally. You check the word communally, and that's where the word communism comes from. Communally, they worked communalistic. Let me say, that's how they used to work. People began adopting to, as society started developing and capitalism came about, then naturally, the whole system impacted on everyone involved, and it sort of like changed the whole concepts of life. But I just also want to say something. I didn't say nothing before about the elections and stuff, because I don't believe in it. I don't believe in elections. There's a there's a saying that kids say, "Oh, you can be anything you want in life. You can even be the president if you want to."
It's
But in
true.
reality, that is not true. In reality, no one could be a president. You got the money, you got the education, you got the wealth. If you don't have that, you can't be part of this election. And have you ever noticed that the people that we vote for, we never elected them. They were already elected. They were already chosen and thrown out there. Obama was one of them too. I don't, with all due respect to whoever respects Obama, but to me, he was nobody. He was really. There was more wars on Iraq by him than any other president that has, before him. So Obama really, yeah, people say he talks nice. Yeah, definitely he talks nice. He's a conniving man. He connives. He knows how to do his thing. He knows how to play those words. He knows how to use those words and tie everybody around it. I don't. I have never voted. I have never voted. I think all my life I've been a Marxist, man, but I'm an extreme Marxist, man, because there's some Marxists that vote, mind you, there's some Marxists that vote, like the Communist Party, they vote, they get their, but to me, I mean, we're dealing with two classes of people, the capitalists, and who they really, the capitalists is not really the ones who own this country. There's 60 families outside of the realm of the capitalists that control this country.
Right.
Have you ever read the book? What is that? The Shark and the Shark and the Sardine. Read that book, The Shark and the Sardine. That tells you very clearly, man. What this system is all about. The shark. Who's the shark? The capitalist? Who's the sardine? We. We the sardines, man. So I don't know, man. I don't know, I mean, if it's good for you, go ahead, do it. I respect it. I love you. I don't take nothing away from that. If you both, I don't care, man, you're still my brother or my sister. It doesn't make no difference. But you'll find out later on in life, as you go further on, you'll find out that it was a waste of time. It was a waste of time. I mean, look at in the Black Panthers. What's his name? That ran.
Bobby Rush,
Elvis
Bobby
Cleveland.
Seale,
Bobby
No,
Seale.
yeah, Bobby Seals. Bobby
Yeah.
Seals ran,
and
but
Bobby
so
Rush
did
from
Elvis
Chicago.
Cleveland. Elvis Cleveland ran too.
Mhm.
Is he the president?
Yeah.
Is Elvis Cleveland president? But I'm gonna tell you, if he would have been the president, he would have been a bad president too. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Thank you,
I
Paulette.
could definitely respect where you're coming from, though, Jorge. Like, I mean, it's one of those things. Like, is it ever going to change? It's apparent that it's not. So if it's not going to change, at what point are we just going to be a little anarchist and burn it all
We're
down and
gonna
then start
change.
from fresh and then start putting
We're
it
gonna
up?
change it. We're the ones.
There you go.
We're the ones that are gonna change this whole
There you go.
system. We're the ones who are going to change it. And there's a lot of work. A lot of work needs to be done because there's a lot of people in the working class, man, that are so stupid. I'm sorry to say that, but it's true. They're so fucking stupid, and ignorant. See, stupidity and ignorance is two different things. They're ignorant, and I was reading a Marx man. He was talking about, how hard, no, living. Have you ever read the Foundations of Leninism? Read it. He talks about the whole thing, about the whole election, the whole 9 yards, man. And we're gonna change it. We're gonna change it. It's gonna be
No, you
hard.
you got a point though. You got a point. Like, I think the best thing that a capitalist ever did was to get a poor white guy, poor black guy, a poor Hispanic, Latino, Chicano, whatever you want to label yourself, and pit them against each other. Like, I've seen political cartoons where it'll say, hey, this immigrant's taking your job away or whatever, it's going to bring down your wages. And this poor working class white guy's like, no, hell no, like we need them out. Like they pit that against each other. They pit that as a means to divide us. And like, again, is it ever going to here? It's not until we say it's going.
That's right, because you see, the whole image of the immigrants coming to this country, you got to understand the conditions of why they're coming to this country. There's a lot of Cubans are coming to this country. And people say, oh man, Cuba is bad because Cubans are, no, that's bullshit. The reason why Cuba is the way it is because the embargo, what you call the embargo?
Blockade.
The blockade.
The blockade,
The
yep.
blockade,
Embargo is legal. Blockade
that
is
makes it
an act of
hard.
war.
That makes it hard for Cuba to move up, man. You know,
Mhm.
they can't. Their cars, man. I was checking out Cuba today on the computer. You know, life in Cuba, man, and their cars are all old, man, old. But their conditions are not. It's not their fault. It's the fault of the United States. And it's the same way that they do to Latin America. They go to Latin America, they fuck up people's land, they fuck up people's economy, and then they force many of them to come over here, and then they show you can't come in. What the fuck? You impressed me in my country, now you're telling me I can't come in? What kind of shit is that?
You're very right, Comrade Jorge. It's interesting. I'm gonna say something real quick, and then Comrade Zombie's got her hand up.
Yeah.
It's very interesting because I just came back from Miami, and a lot of my Venezuelan family were telling me, it's hard. You only make $30 a month, and when a loaf of bread costs 20 or whatever, and then we had some very interesting conversations, and literally like 2 or 3 family members said the same thing. Where in different conversations with this big ass Venezolano family, they didn't talk to each other, but they both, like 3 or 4 people, like elders of the family, said the same thing. And I asked them straight out. I said, well, there's some of us that think that the socialist movement, or whatever you want to believe, Marxist or whatever, can survive here in the States. How come it hasn't worked down there? And they both told me 2 things. And I remember shitting myself when I heard it. They said, and in Spanish, but I'm going to say it nicely in English. They said, if God had not put his oil in the jungle, number one, and number two, if the United States left us alone, we would have been fine. And I was like, really? And some of my tios were like, you don't understand. We could go out with a machete, ahí en la jungla, there in the jungle, and start hitting at the ground, and petroleum seeps up naturally. He said Venezuela was the second or third largest OPEC producing, excuse me, petroleum nation. And I didn't know that. I always, thought it was always in the Middle East. And he said, yeah, the Middle East has always been number one. Venezuela's been number two. And I was like, no shit. And he goes, well, why do you think the Americans have always tried to overthrow every single socialist president since Chavez? Always, always. There's always been a coup. And whenever they get caught, they're either mercenaries from, some NATO country, or they're American expats or American. I was like, damn. So, and literally, they were a little pissed. They were like, if we'd never had natural petroleum, I think we would have been all right. But the Americans, they're always meddling with our shit. And I was like, damn, like that. I mean, I couldn't argue with that. Comrade Zombie, you had your hand up, Comrade. Please go ahead.
Well, you guys kind of touched on what I was going to talk about. I did see something interesting the other day. We were talking about how messed up our political system is here. People seem to forget that whether someone calls themselves a Democrat or a Republican, they all come from the 10%. And that, and in this country, the 2%. And that 2% does not give 2 shits about the other 98% of us. They don't. And we don't have a choice. Everybody's like, well, you can, at least I get to vote. But they don't realize that you are voting for the candidates that have been handpicked for you.
Right.
Look what happened with Bernie. DNC didn't want Bernie to be the candidate. So what happened? He wasn't the candidate. They handpick the candidates, and they pick them from that 2%. And they know that no matter who gets in office, they're still going to be capitalist friendly, And then an interesting thing that I read the other day, it's so bad here right now the CPUSA, the Communist Party of the United States of America, encouraged people to vote Democratic this year in the next
Oh.
election. They literally voted, they literally said vote blue because the right is getting so fascist that we have to keep them out of office.
And what is and Democrats are what? The left?
Well, I know, right?
You know?
I know, correct.
Hello?
Go ahead, Zombie. Sorry, I don't.
No, go ahead, Ralph. I
Go ahead,
see you.
brother.
You're dying. You're dying. Come
No,
on.
no,
I know. I'm being around here like,
Come on.
No,
what?
no, I
Go
tell
ahead,
brother
Ralph.
Ted brought it home, and I appreciate that because como socialista too, I believe in socialism that it can work. And when it comes to
Mhm.
voting, you're correct. We never vote, and they're selected, and it is Oprah Winfrey is the one that's responsible for Obama. If you think about it, she had to quit her show, and she did it outright. A billionaire's right. It's if you
Right.
don't have, he's brother Chad's right. You don't have that money, you ain't going nowhere. And
Yeah.
to top it off, you are selected because we don't vote. With every vote we cast in America, not one. Well, some of them are direct votes, so we can vote locally, do stuff here. But when you vote for president, you're not voting for president. You're casting a
No.
vote for electoral college, a slave system from the 1800s. Electoral
Yeah.
college is a system that is 535 people in the Congress that vote. The electors vote. They don't even have to
Yeah.
consider your vote. Bush got in there, and other presidents, including what's his name, Trump. They get less votes, yet they become the president. So yeah, this
Yeah.
whole system is rigged when it comes to presidency like that. And when it comes to the Communist Party USA, for example, they've been out of the loop since 1934. I believe
Yeah.
34,
Yeah.
24. And it's not just Biden. They encourage people to vote for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
So is there,
Yeah.
the thing is, it's going to have to be the people, and I agree with you, brother Chad. It's going to have to be the people that come together and realize this, and
Yeah.
sometimes we're going to need that kick in the butt.
Yeah.
But there's just enough dumb, educated people too, or
Mhm,
purposeful,
mhm,
intentional
Yeah.
ignorance on their part, because they know what's up, a lot of them, but they just,
Mhm.
that good life, that money, that or whatever
Right.
they're acquiring, to them, hey, they're fine living that life, don't rock the boat. And so, yeah,
Mhm.
we're gonna have to do it. The people are gonna have to do it. How it's done, I don't know. But I do know that, from reading Kwame's book and from the reading you just did, it reminded me of all these philosophers with all these beautiful words, Voltaire, Rousseau, Descartes, all these philosophers. They had great words, but they were short-sighted, number one, and two, a lot of them were straight out white supremacists. They didn't even care about black people.
Mhm.
Because when you
Mhm.
ask them, they're like, oh no, and women, they didn't care about. So they were considered enlightened until you picked up the sheets and you're like, oh hell, you picked up the carpet, you see all the dirt there. So great words, they're just beautiful words. But sometimes Obama gave us a lot of beautiful words too, and some of our own
Mhm,
politicians from the Chicano community, they give us some beautiful
mhm.
words too, right? So yeah,
Right.
but I agree with you, brother. It's got to be the people. I just don't know how we're gonna do it though, unless we start talking, right? But go for it.
What were you gonna say, brother? What had?
Oh man, I forgot. Ooh, it's my age. I'm catching up.
You
Yeah,
still
I'll be
young.
76. I'll be 76 on Wednesday.
Oh, nice. Okay.
No, nice. I'm scared. Hey, nice. I'm scared.
I'm gonna read some
76,
comments in
76
the
is the new
comments
56.
oh, go ahead, Zombie.
I said 76 is the new 56.
Hey, there you
Oh,
go.
thank you.
So when I was talking about, did capitalism have an effect on, how we were raised and religion and so forth? Hermana Veronica put something in there that there's a children's book called Stone Soup, which I need to make a note of because that sounds interesting. And Zombie corrected me when I was talking about the Catholic plowshare movement. It's turning swords into plowshares. And then, it's just, again, it's just interesting. Oh, and then there's a comment from Comrade Kwame that black slavery exists now in Libya because of Barack Obama. That's right. And I forgot that Hillary Clinton had a direct effect on that as well too. She ordered the strike, if I'm not mistaken. Slicker than slick. That's exactly right. And Hermana Veronica used the term the United Snakes. I always say that. I always say the United Snakes of America, and they spell America with three capital A's, because I
That's
mean,
what they are, snakes.
it's so apparent, even for myself, when I visited family in Miami that were from Venezuela. One of the reasons why they were there is because of a very severe medical condition. And it's just funny, you know, people that aren't educated on Marxism, Leninism, socialism, communism, they have this idea on the whole socialist communist movement, right? And I remember going to a family's house, and they said, yeah, when your dad came over, he was so sick that they actually sent him with supplies. And I was like, send him with supplies. With my medical background, I was like, shit, who the hell paid for that? Like, insurances, like, you have to have a pre-authorization. Sometimes you got to pay out of pocket. And I shit you not, you guys, we went to this patio and they had a shed, and I opened it up and there were still brand new IV bags. There were all sorts of medications. They literally gave this man a couple of years worth and said, if you're gonna die, you might as well die in that capitalist society. They ain't gonna help you here. Take it all. And they literally gave, like, they shipped it, like they gave him all this stuff. And it's so interesting to me because in a previous life, I worked at a nonprofit migrant camp based nonprofit. Like, we literally would go into the camps here in Oregon, set up clinics and so forth. And I couldn't get free shit to save my life. I asked Kaiser for donations, and we were a 401, 501c3. Like, it was a tax write off if they donated for us. Every now and then I'd get like a used wheelchair, and literally these brown evil communists gave my family member like literally years worth of supply. It was phenomenal to see. And then I remember that having to deal with an elder family member that had passed away over there back in Maracaibo, that they were talking about how like the state will actually help pay certain things if they pass away, and they have like debt or so forth. Like, the state would just acquire some of that. And I was like, that shit does not happen here. Like, it was so interesting. The culture shock for me was so apparent on the good end. The bad end too was that, I met some family members that they were like, hey, check this place out. And I'm like, damn, that's a nice park. What is it? It's a nice resort. And they were like, no, that's the Trump resort. And I was like, get me the fuck out of here. Like, what? And they were so proud of that. So it's really interesting how the two halves of the family, some still stuck with their socialista mentalities, and then others, just like the Cubans in Florida, were very, like, they lost it. Like, they opened up businesses and they fell sucker to that capitalistic notion, and they were very right winged. And I think that money just got to them. Like, it was very interesting, the two dynamics all in the same family. Like, it was an interesting trip for me. And my eyes were very much open. I'm gonna go ahead and continue on the bottom paragraph, and then if we have any other comments or if y'all want to say anything, just raise your hands and I'll shout you out.
Yeah.
So bottom paragraph, page 227 says, the problem with individuals like Barack Obama was that they were very good at making the state appear to be neutral and that it can serve the highest interests of all the people. 100%. That right there. If I ever had to like explain to somebody like how Barack Obama did it, like that right there, that's exactly how he did it. That's how he suckered a lot of people, um, including myself, unfortunate to say. I remember watching him give the keynote address at the DNC, the Democratic National Convention in 2004, in which he said that there is not a liberal America and a conservative America. I remember this. There is a United States of America. There is not a Black America or a white America. This is not a Black or Latino America, an Asian America. This is the United States of America, end quote. Many political pundits believe that it was the speech that he gave in 2004 which set him up to be the 44th president of the United States, and I agree. I don't think it was that speech per se, but more so the middle of the road strategy that he would employ throughout his whole 8 years in the executive branch. And I'm going to pause right there real quick, because that also to me echoes when I hear white people say I don't see color. Like, to me, it was very refreshing when we had a comrade elder, High Thurman, when I heard him with my own ears when he came here for his book reading in Portland, say that any kind of liberation, any kind of revolution that happens, it has to be a Black liberation first. And I remember thinking like, damn, like, I know he's radical, but damn, like, for an old white guy, like that's hella radical. Like that was very refreshing to hear. And then I remember seeing one of his Facebook posts where he says, "Of course I see color. I see beautiful black and brown people and so forth." And that's refreshing because when you meet people that don't see color and they want everything to be picture perfect, it's those people that get suckered into that neutral state. They're the
Mhm.
ones that fall for it, right? And it's sad to say, but I think a majority of quote unquote Americans, whether they're working class, rich or poor, they fall for that. They fall for that. And that's something that's beautiful, but it does separate us, right? Go ahead, Hermana Veronica. You want to say something?
Yeah, anytime that I hear, that whole I don't see color and uh, you know, a, a sort of being taking like a neutral stand on that, I always think of H. Rap Brown and his book Die Nigger Die, because you just can't get away from speaking of color. I want to read something from that book. It says, color is the first thing Black people in America become aware of. You are born into a world that has given color meaning, and color becomes the single most determining factor of your existence. Color determines where you live, how you live, and under certain circumstances, if you will live. Color determines your friends, your education, your mother's and father's jobs, where you will play, what you play, and more importantly, what you think of yourself. In and of itself, color has no meaning, but the white world has given its meaning political, social, economic, historical, physiological, and philosophical. Once color has been given meaning, an order is thereby established. If you are born Black in America, you are the last of that order. As kids, we learn the formula for the structure of American society. If you're white, you're all right. If you're brown, stick around. But if you're Black, get back, get back.
Mm.
It's true.
Thank you for sharing that, sister. That damn, that it's apparent, it's apparent. It's for me, it's refreshing when I hear white allies say that not only do they recognize the class struggle, but they recognize that the race. I've been fortunate enough that a few of the white allies that we had here in Oregon, that at times when we like do things or we get approached by law enforcement or whatever, like they'll go and talk to them. They're like, nah, you guys don't even got to mess with that. Like, they're not gonna shoot us. They're not gonna do anything. Like I think when white allies reach that revolutionary state of mind, that to me is refreshing, and that to me helps build that class solidarity. Because again, I forget what creepy political cartoon that I saw, but literally it had like this capitalist like bank, and I remember like there was like a donkey and an elephant, right? The Democratic and the National and the Republican Party, so to speak. And there was like people at a table, and they were both of them were whispering into this white guy's ear, "Hey, this immigrant's gonna take your job or whatever." But yet they're all the same class, right? And what's interesting is I know Comrade Elder Jorge and Comrade Kwame might know more about this, but if you ever look at old political communist art, specifically from Spain, like when they had that whole revolution with the presidential dictator there, there are a lot of really cool poster arts where it'll say "Viva la comunistas" or whatever, and it'll have like a pyramid, right? And the top is like this big fat rich guy. He looks like the banker from Monopoly. He's got the top hat, and then in the middle is like the church. There's like priests or whatever, and then on the third level there's like factory workers, and on the bottom level is like peasant people. You can tell,
Mm.
and then you'll see like like subscripts. It'll say if the bottom people were to just stand up, everything would fall, and it's so true.
Ooh.
It's so true. Like if you look at a lot of like revolutionary communistic art, those political cartoons, they're so true to this day. And we're talking, damn, that's got to be what, almost 100 years old now, if not a little bit more than
Mhm.
that. Like it's very interesting. And hopefully one of these days we'll get there and it'll change. But no, thank you for sharing that, hermana.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and continue. He found a way to represent hope and inspiration to many demographics and classes throughout the United States. To oppressed and working class masses, he represented the voice and spoke to their feelings of inclusion and neglect. To the petty bourgeois middle class, he represented the person who could unite the people, achieve the perfect union, their class had yearned for generations while saving the middle class, quote unquote, American dream. That's so true. To the bourgeois liberal capitalist class, he was the he was the perfect representative of neo-colonialism, a blackface who could further their white supremacist imperialistic agenda domestically and abroad. And god damn, that is so true. Look what they did in Libya. Um, and actually, if I'm not mistaken, I think there was one or two coups during his tenure against some of the government in Venezuela, if I'm not mistaken. It's so interesting because I remember in my trip to Miami, my uncle had showed me a video of Presidente Maduro saying in Spanish that if they could ever find out that if Hugo Chavez died of that weird form of cancer at the hands of the American government, that they would automatically declare war. Like boom, just like that. He said it like that. And it was like at a US, like a NATO meeting, no, US nation, something like that. And I remember thinking, damn, like that's creepy. Like, I know he died of cancer, but do they really think they had like a biological weapon? Like, holy shit. And again, my family was like, you
He
know,
was
if that
held
would've
that as a he was
goddamn oil somewhere else.
he
What,
was
what was that,
kidnapped.
Jorge?
He was kidnapped at some point, wasn't he?
At
Chavez
some point he was, yeah. At some
was
point he was,
kidnapped,
yeah.
man, and they made him. They made people begin to believe that he was dead when he wasn't.
Yeah, that's right.
Bush
Yeah.
did
You know?
that.
That's right. And look at Fidel, like how many assassinations did he survive? Hundreds.
150. I count all of them. 100. No, 250. 250. You Ralph may have a higher score than me, but
Actually,
250. And do
according
you
to the
believe? Yeah, go ahead, Ralph.
according to the CIA's own documents, 600 plus times, and it could have been. They think it's like
Yeah,
they,
okay.
Damn.
600. Yeah, okay, that's cool. That's cool. That's true. So, you know, and for some reason, he was never harmed. And that's one of the things that I tell people. I said, damn, man, just look at Cuba. If Castro have lived this long, you know, and nobody has ever harmed them, don't you think that there's a reason why nobody has ever harmed them? The reason why is because the people themselves have protected him,
That's right.
you know. And everywhere he went with a protector. Somebody protected him, you know. But I wanted to say something much earlier. You know, I had a conversation with somebody today, and he's independentista. Independentista, nacionalista puertorriqueño, independentista. And I tell him, I said, listen, let me ask you something. Let's say we get independent from the United States. What kind of system you gonna establish? Oh, capitalist, just like this one. I said, wait, hold up, man.
Oh no.
I said, hold up.
Oh no.
I said, hold up, man. You fighting against an enemy, and you're gonna build his image. I mean, does that sound weird? Doesn't it sound weird to you? But you know something? There's a lot of independentistas that think like that.
Yeah.
All they want to do is get rid of the United States, and then they're going to establish a new order, capitalist.
You know what's interesting about what you said, Jorge, is there's a lot of people in the circles that I surround myself with that have sent me videos of who's that president from Ukraine, Zelensky, right?
Yeah.
And that he was in favor of La Junta for Puerto Rico, and we're giving him millions of dollars. What? And then these same circles sent me video of Ukrainian soldiers singing the national anthem, and they do a hand gesture. If you haven't seen the video, see it and tell me that is not a Nazi salute. It's so creepy. It is so creepy. And we're giving them millions. Anyways, I digress. Oh my goodness. Okay. Second paragraph, page 228. Were you gonna say something, Hermana Veronica?
No, I was just cracking up, but I just had a visual of Trump, you know, when he would be speaking. I'm not even gonna say speaking, he'd just be talking, I'm not even gonna
Right.
say that he was speaking. He would just be talking a whole bunch of gibberish, but he would do the hand signals and stuff. It's just we got to pay attention to this stuff, but it's so subtle, but it's so in your face at the same time.
That's exactly right. And I think for people like you and I that have that mental health background, when we look at body language, sometimes
Oh
that to
yeah.
me says more than anything, right?
Hmm.
It's very interesting. You're right. When I see like some of the stuff that he used to talk about, just even his stance, I'm like,
Hmm.
we already know que está pendejo el way, but that like there was something not right with that guy. It just something wasn't right up there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm on page 228, first paragraph. I don't think I studied a president as closely as I did Obama. Before he became the president of the United States, I had read both of his books, Dreams from My Father and The Audacity of Hope. I noticed in both of the books how well he could easily traverse the wide political spectrum and could understand where the radical left was coming from to the ultra conservative right and every political trend in between. Again, that's how he got us, or some of us. I don't think a lot of politicians have that sort of political dexterity. I noticed that most politically inclined people are only familiar with their own school of thought. Occasionally, you would have come across someone who had studied other political philosophies, but in the main, I found that most people resisted and resided on a political island, quote unquote, which isolated them from all others. This is one of the greatest divisions in America that can easily be exploited by opportunists on both the left and right because it can appeal to a ready-made populace who will blindly follow leaders who can appeal to their own emotional passions and limited world outlooks. Ever since I had read Sun Tzu's Art of War, I realized that a well-rounded person must become familiar with all sides of anything, be it political, philosophical, or otherwise. Sun Tzu said that, quote, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle, end quote. That axiom I tried to apply to everything. Even though I was a communist and had read Karl Marx's book Capital, I had also read the godfather of capitalism's book, Adam Smith, too, The Wealth of Nations. Although I was a dialectical materialist philosophically, I also studied the various philosophical schools of idealism as well. Even though I would read the autobiographies of revolutionaries, I would read books like Decision Points by the former President George W. Bush as well. In order to know myself and the enemy, I had to become familiar with all sides. That's awesome. That's actually very tactical as well. That was a lesson I applied to all things. Barack Obama was just someone who I found to be the most versatile as a statesman. I might go so far as to say that he may have been the most gifted statesman that this country has ever produced as far as professional representatives for the capitalist, imperialistic ruling class. And Comrade Kwame says he mentioned the coup in Ukraine. This was the first black president that strengthened the neo-Nazis, fascists in Ukraine, where we now have paramilitary groups. That's very true. That is so very true. And it's interesting because I downloaded an app that's like a news program that comes from Venezuela, and it's very interesting when you see different news from different parts of the world and how unfiltered they are. I used to think, man, I hate watching the news here locally because it was so depressing. But to see unfiltered news and to see that Putin years ago, a matter of fact, I think maybe even during Barack's regime, years ago, warned NATO about Ukraine, warned them, gave them warning. Like we're talking years ahead of time. And now we're in this mess. And yet, when you look at like the mainstream media, CNN, ABC News, CBS, it's almost made to look like Putin's this madman and the communists are coming and everybody save Ukraine, right? It's very interesting. And then like Sister Veronica says in the comments, it's all interconnected. Nice job connecting the dots, brother. Very well, actually. And it's only a conspiracy until it comes to be, and that's true as well. I used to watch Barack Obama give speeches, and I noticed that depending upon also you who were or what class outlook you had, different demographics would walk away from the same speech with a different message. I have never seen a politician employ doublespeak so artfully and creatively as him. I remember one State of the Union speech he had given in which he mentioned how he was addressing the disproportionate effect that mass incarceration had upon the Black and brown communities from the war on drugs. He had recently gotten the drug sentencing laws changed between crack cocaine and powder cocaine. I remember everybody applauding him for that. However, right after he said that, in the very next sentence, he said he was allocating millions more federal dollars to the Edward Burr Memorial Justice Alliance grant program. Anyone who has read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, knows that that grant program money went towards expanding the so-called war on drugs. So in one breath, he was making the public believe that he was trying to bring the war on drugs to an end, but to the capitalist imperialistic ruling class, he was telling them that they didn't have anything to worry about. And I'm going to stop right there real quick because it's very interesting for those of us that were, 80s kids and remember the DARE program in school and that whole war on drugs. It's very interesting to hear family in Venezuela complain about the new narco problem that Mexico had experienced that is now affecting the socialism there. And it's interesting to find out why. They use a form of currency called the bolivar. And I think, gosh, it may be 30 or 40 bolivares to every dollar, right? However, somebody many years ago instilled a system that's kind of like this non-spoken system where the American dollar is used, and it is now depreciating the bolivar. So unless you got family from the outside literally sending you money, which wire transfers are far and few in between, and that money, which is American dollars, is now more valuable than your current money, how are you going to get it? Especially if the government's like, nah, fuck the Americans. We're not using their money. I mean, I would, right? How are you going to get it? And it's interesting that, when you're starving and somebody comes to you and says, do this for, $100 or whatever, and you only make 20 or 30 a month, right? And it costs about 10 or 20 to feed your whole family for a month. $100, that's a lot of money. And so it's very interesting how the narco cultura is weaving its way into Colombia. Well, it's always been in Colombia, but that neighboring state of Venezuela is now seeping down south, and it's because of the American dollar. Now, don't quote me. I don't have any political or historical references for that, but between us as comrades, who do you think was in charge of installing that American dollar there? If they couldn't assassinate any of the presidents, like they tried Fidel, they're trying to do an economic war. That's the first thing that came to my mind. They're trying to subdue the Bolivar. They're trying to subdue the economics. And unfortunately, there are certain quote unquote bad guys that are going to take advantage of that through the narco cultura. And we all know what happened in the 70s and 80s with Black and brown communities and the CIA being in charge of bringing crack cocaine to the United States to fund Black Ops programs. That shit is happening all over again in 2023. Isn't that interesting? My
And
little conspiracy theory,
the
but
funny thing is that remember Nicaragua,
that's right.
the Nicaragua, where they were sending drugs for Nicaragua to the United States so that they could fund the counter revolution in Nicaragua. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're totally right. It's just like that all over again. And Hermana Veronica in the comment says a very interesting comment. It's sad but true. America depreciates everything it touches, including itself. So true. Look at the whole land back movement. I mean, this country was rich on resources, and you can't tell me that's not why Manifest Destiny happened. Go ahead, Comrade Zombie. You have your hand up.
Hey, I just wanted to tell you guys, thank you. I just got a call from work. I have to go out and see a patient. But I wanted to tell you, thank you. Very nice educational conversation as usual. All power to the people.
All power to the people. We got nothing but revolutionary love for you, Hermana.
Thank you.
Take care. All right, I'll go ahead and continue. I would notice that he would do shit like that a lot, sending two contradictory messages to different classes of the population. And it was that made him such a great statesman for the imperialistic ruling class, but such a great obstacle for revolutionaries such as myself. He was the perfect Machiavellian statesman to keep people lulled to sleep, believing in some quote unquote neutral state that could turn their hopelessness into a hope they could believe in. He was Machiavelli's lion and Fox wrapped into charisma and a inspirational idea to a united America. God, it's so true. Ever since I read I can never pronounce that, Niccolò Machiavelli's book, The Prince, I recognized how dangerous people like Barack Obama were. If you looked at the results and not being distracted by their flowery speeches, you would notice that just as many people would be murdered by the police every year, nothing would change. Wars of imperialism would still be waged, murdering scores of people in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya. The Patriot Act would still erode the civil liberties of the United States citizens. Immigrants would still be locked in detention centers and without meaningful due process, etc. The only difference was that people would feel hopeful like a Sunday morning preacher who made them feel salvation and delivery was near if they just held on a little while longer. In The Prince, Machiavelli explained that one of the most important characteristics of a great statesman was being able to dupe the people to in which he said, and I quote, a prince being thus obliged to know well how to act as a beast must initiate the fox and the lion. For the lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves. Those that wish to be only lions do not understand this. Therefore, a prudent ruler ought not to keep faith when by doing it would be against his interest, and when the reasons which made him bind himself no longer exist. If men were all good, this precept would not only be a good one, but as they are bad and would not observe their faith with you, so you are not bound to keep with faith with them, nor have legitimate grounds ever failed a prince who wished to show colorable excuses for non-fulfillment of his promises. Of this, one could furnish an infinite number of modern examples and show how many times peace had been broken and how many promises rendered worthless by the faithfulness of princes and those who have been best able to initiate the fox have succeeded the best. But it is necessary to be able to disguise this character well and to be a great feigner and dissembler. And men are so simple and so ready to obey present necessities that one who deceives will always find those who will allow themselves to be deceived. Oh, man, that's so true. In 2008, my mom won. In 2008, my mom won a small lawsuit. She told me that she was going to get me a lawyer to help me fight my case and some of the money she had won. Initially, I was against that. After losing my PCR and Christopher Zoller playing me, I figured the only way I could give any time back is if I could locate some newly discovered evidence I could go back on a PCR2 on. I had filed several motions in court while I was still at Newcastle, attempting to retrieve the trial transcripts. Christopher Zoller never used at my PCR hearing, but I was having a difficult time acquiring that. Around this time in my bed, I was going through many of my bouts of depression. I had virtually given up fighting my case. I had resigned myself to seeing out the remainder of my years in prison. My mother was so hesitant to hire me a lawyer, though, that I picked my legal books back up and started poring over my prior legal research. A week hadn't even passed before I found a fundamental error in my case that I was sure was strong enough to give back 5 years. I couldn't believe I had overlooked the sentencing issue for so many years. One of the dissenting judges in my appeal had concluded in the case, this is case law, Ellis versus State 736 NE 2D 731, Indiana 2000, in his footnotes. After I read that case, I realized that I filed a motion to correct an erroneous sentence and a memorandum of law in support of my motion, then they would have to reduce my sentence by 5 years according to the law. In the Ellis case, he relied upon Indiana Code 35-50-12C, which in part stated that, and I quote, the court may order terms of imprisonment to be served consecutively, even if the sentences are not imposed at the same time. However, except for crimes of violence, the total consecutive terms of imprisonment to which the defendant is sentenced for felony convictions and seen out of an episode of criminal conduct shall not exceed the presumptive sentence for a felony which is one class felony higher than the most serious felonies for the person which the person has been convicted. End quote. In my case, I I had been convicted of three criminal recklessness charges, all of which are considered nonviolent felonies, according to Indiana statutes. For that reason, the state of Indiana could only give me a limited aggregate term for those three convictions. Since they were all Class D felonies, the aggregate term they could give me was the presumptive sentence for the next higher felony, which was a Class C felony. The presumptive sentence for a Class C felony was 4 years at the time. That meant that the court had to reduce the aggregate term for those three convictions from 9 years to 4 years, which would have taken my overall sentence from 39 years in prison to 34 years in prison. In the state of Indiana, for quote unquote good behavior, I could get out of prison after serving half of that. I'm
Wow.
going to stop right there and read some comments. Perfect quote from the Prince for the part of the chapter, Brother Kwame. That's exactly right. Um, everybody knows Tupac made Machiavelli famous, and I had always wanted to read Machiavelli. I knew of it, but I didn't know that it literally says that in the book. And I think that's got to be like a template that all American politicians use. I think Barack was one of the best at duping both sides. I mean, like Brother Kwame mentioned. Um, Continuing, it says, my mom ended up hiring Hillary Bo Ricks, who was the first paid lawyer we had hired to represent me back in 1998. I had fired her back then because she was never available when I needed to speak to her about my case. Back then, my patience was extremely thin. I couldn't deal with someone who didn't visit me when I asked or didn't answer my phone calls. However, I knew she had a good reputation for doing other litigation work. So I figured that I would hire her again if she considered being my quote unquote legal mouthpiece. If I did all the work on my case, she agreed and gave me a reduced price for representing me. After I drew up my motion to correct erroneous sentence and the memorandum of law in support of it, I had my mom type them up and submit them to Hillary for review. She was impressed. She only changed a few sentences in what I had given her and had submitted them to my trial court. I approached that situation like I did Hillary because I knew she had hired a guy named David King as one of her paralegals when he had gotten out of prison. Even though I hated law work, I knew it was a career I could excel at when I get out of prison if I wanted to. I figured I could demonstrate how well I understood the law and could successfully draw up legal documents. Then maybe she would possibly hire me upon my release, as she had done David King decades before. Ultimately, my goal was to dedicate my life to revolutionary work, but I wanted to have a plan B I could rely on until I was able to make plan A tangible reality. To my surprise, she agreed to give me a shot if I went to school for 2 years, and when I got out, acquired the necessary credentials to work at her office. I kept that option in the back of my mind. When I went back to court for my notion to correct erroneous sentence, we didn't even have a real hearing. They automatically granted my motion and reduced my sentence by 5 years, leaving me with 34 years.
Hmm.
Instead of conferring over the validity, gosh, I can't say that, of my
Validity.
motion, Hillary had disclosed to the judge that I had actually done all the work and research. He was impressed with me as well and gave me an unprecedented and unexpected pep talk. I listened silently, glad that I had taken the time out throughout my prison bit to study my enemy's laws and to learn to traverse their system for my benefit. I found myself on a number of ranges while I was on SHU for that particular stint. I normally would spend a year or so on a range and then would move up to another one. One particular range I was placed on had quite a few Aryans on it. Over the years, I had read a number of books which explained their ideology and outlook on life. One of the biggest contradictions that I had uncovered was the fact that many of their books upheld the theory of revolution as a scientific fact. I found that amusing because the science of evolution disproved any notions of racial superiority and in fact demonstrated that all people on Earth had come from Black people in Africa, and we were genetically one species, despite the various physical adaptations we made to our environment over tens of thousands of years. Yet here it was in their own writings where many of their ideological leaders were substantiating evolution as a scientific fact. I'm going to stop right there too, because I've actually often heard some of the Christian brethren say that Africa as well was the root of the Garden of Eden. Um, and then I'm just reading some comments. That's some self-determination right there from Sister Veronica. I'll go ahead and continue. Oh, were you going to say something over here?
No.
Okay. I remember a number of times getting into dialogues with a few of these Aryans about evolution and their white supremacist beliefs. At the time, they still hadn't built the outside fenced-in single-man cages where we could see each other and interact more freely. So we were limited to talking to each other through a solid steel door. I remember this one time, particularly talking to this Aryan out at Rec. I flat out asked him if he recognized evolution as a scientific fact. He admitted that he did. I went on to ask him how he reconciled his white supremacist beliefs with his understandings of the science of evolution. That's when he disclosed something to me that I will never forget. Yeah. Shout out to the brother, because I couldn't do that. I couldn't talk to people like that. Quote unquote, man, all of this white supremacist shit is political, end quote, he admitted. It has nothing to do with science. We know it's bullshit, but it's our way to organize white people. I couldn't believe my ears. This was coming from a guy who was a high-ranking member in the Aryan Brotherhood. He wasn't the only one who admitted this same thing to me. He was just the first. That's when I realized that many white supremacist leaders are very aware that they are wrong on the wrong side of history and consciously misleading other white people. For them, it was a tool to build solidarity against white people in order to carry out their political and economic agendas. While in prison, it was to control the illicit drug market and for protection. Outside of prison, it was to fight for a fascist future where, quote unquote, might makes right. And they viewed white supremacy as a necessary evil to preserve white identity, white privilege, and the white power over all other people. It was a struggle over who would dominate the world, which hand in hand would be at the capitalist imperialist system's drive for world domination. I'm going to stop there real quick. It's interesting that Brother Kwame had a epiphany while serving time and educating himself on Aryan literature and discussing this with this person and having that understanding that it's more political, and then probably making him understand it as well too. You know, honestly, revolutionarily speaking, for me myself, I always remember before realizing class struggle that it was a racial struggle. That it wasn't until I actually worked at a nonprofit outpatient primary care clinic that was mainly for migrant workers that we got credentialed with like the state agency to get like Medicaid money, right? So when you do that, you have to open your doors for anybody that makes a certain income. And I remember on numerous occasions meeting very poor white people from rural parts of Oregon that knew of this clinic and that were told by some of the campesinos and some of the migrants, some of the day laborers to come there, that the healthcare was good, that they would be treated with respect, and that as poor white people, they didn't feel comfortable going to Kaiser. They didn't feel comfortable going to Legacy. They didn't feel comfortable going to Providence, which was a Catholic institution, but they felt comfortable coming to our clinic. And I remember that was very insightful for me because it was those same people that every now and then when we would have a scare, if you guys can remember when that idiot Trump was first in office, how there was talk about, immigration raids and defunding a certain like institutions that were ethnically based and so forth. I remember literally not once, but maybe twice being in the clinic and having two separate families, white, poor, working class families that heard about the people, some of the MA, some of the doctors being nervous about an ICE stop. For those of you all that aren't familiar, Oregon was one of the first to have unannounced ICE stops. As a matter of fact, if you look at the Oregonian or OregonLive.com and you look at like 2018, 2019, 2020, there were literally people that would just get stopped and say, show me your paperwork. There was a individual that was painting a house. Um, he was undocumented, but they actually went into the house, pulled him out, took him down to downtown Portland, processed him at the ICE facility. And then he didn't have any criminal background. I mean, he was just quote unquote illegal trying to work and survive. So they let him go. After taking him out of this house he was paying, he left his vehicle there. And so he had to walk from Portland to Tigard, Oregon, which is, I don't know, good 20, 30 miles on foot just to go and get his vehicle back. Like in literally a couple blocks away from me, there were ICE bond agents. So like bail bond agents, but they were like subcontracted for ICE. They were literally trying to kidnap somebody. I mean, they said they were ICE agents, they had guns, they had badges, but they told this Chicano to get inside the car, that they had mug shots for him. And he was like, nah, man, like I'm a citizen. You can't do this. Show me your warrant and this and that. And it's a famous video. If you look at it, OregonLive.com, they have video of it. It was literally right outside of the courthouse. So then ACLU was doing legal observation. So at this time, these families were seeking medical care in our clinic. And I remember when they would hear about that, I remember sometimes they would go, and before or after their appointments, they would drive around and check things out for us. And I remember that really made an impact to me. Like that was a way into my brown revolutionary heart. I was like, damn, if these people would take that chance to do that, like that solidarity. And then that's when I started thinking is not necessarily a racial struggle, because obviously as brown berets, we're all about the liberation of Aslan, Lanbac, and the Chicano nation, so to speak, right? But I think that when those events happened to me, I started having a more deeper understanding of class struggle and interracial solidarity within that class struggle. Is very eye-opening. I'll go ahead and continue reading. Um, that's one of the reasons why I never believed in the strategy of appealing to white people's conscience. How do you appeal to a people or a person's conscience when they're already aware of what they believe in is false? How can one change a system from within when those leaders of it see it as a necessary tool for evil for maintaining political and economic power? That's ridiculous. The only way one can put an end to white supremacy is by destroying the social economic system that found it to be a materially necessarily evil for its survival and expansion. If you think just Aryans in prison know that it's only political, but the politicians in the white supremacist White House in Washington, D.C. don't, then you have to be among some of the most gullible people in the world. I think the Aryans on my range grew to respect me, not as a real friend, but as a worthy adversary that they wanted to keep close. I felt the same way about most of them too, but I did form one genuine friendship with one of them. It was this one Aryan friend of mine while on the SHU who put me in the car with him when he started to get cell phones, weed, and tobacco in. It was around the time that I got my first flip phone and started to have weed and tobacco on a regular basis. The cell phone wasn't mine per se, but to help me get out. He gave me a phone that I could rent for him for a little bit of nothing until I could outright buy it from him. He was actually very reasonable. Out of all the Aryans I had come across in prison I had any associations with, he was the only one and the only way I ever really formed a genuine relationship and friendship with. I can't say I fully trusted him, but he was the closest that I ever had. I never asked him, well, why he joined a white supremacist group like that, but I figured it had more to do with access it gave him to do drugs and cell phones more than any ideological belief. He was another one I would talk to about evolution, but we really didn't address the issues of race, since he never gave me the impression that race was something that he was hung up on. I very rarely gave Arians books of mine because I didn't know whether they were actually gathering intel like I would do to them or not. But I gave him a few of my books on atheism he could read. He was one of the few atheists I had come across in prison that I could openly dialogue about the subject. I'm sure I made an impression on him short time while we were there on the same range together. I don't think he ever thought he would become friends with a communist, just like I never thought I would ever see a white supremacist as one. I spent most of my days talking on the phone with my family and friends all the time. I would still sit by myself in my studies, but having a cell phone at my disposal caused me to slack a lot. I remember the first time I learned how to text people how excited I was, something I'm sure people took for granted on the outside. It took me a little while to learn all the abbreviations people would often use in their text messages to get back to me. The first time my cousin texted me with a TTYL, I don't know what the hell she was talking about. For the longest, I thought LOL meant lots of love. After a while, I became as adept as any teenager on the outside. One of the first people I reached out to was Harry. One of my people ran into him somewhere and put me in touch with him. I wanted to knock off two birds with one stone. I was in need of some money to take care of my newly acquired expenses. I had rejected receiving any money from him in the past, but I figured he owed me for all the years I had been in here for robbing a bank to help him get off of a case. I was still angry that he had snitched on me in that case, but I didn't want to go back to the streets chasing past grievances. So I gave him the opportunity to send me a lump sum of money one time, and then we would forever go our separate ways. Initially, he wanted to send me money and started coming to visit me. That's when I found out that they had thrown out his felony charges altogether for testifying and not catching any new cases after a certain period of time. That revelation made me feel some type of way. So he didn't get the wrong idea about why I was reaching out to him. I let him know out that we weren't friends. I just figured I would settle the situation between him and I once and for all before I got out. Nothing more, nothing less. I didn't want to restore a friendship that I felt had been impeccably destroyed or any shit like that. What was done was done. Either I could get out and be on one with him, or we could squash it and move on with our lives. I wanted the latter. Being bitter had played enough of a toll on me for over the years. This was my way to address it where it didn't cause me to get out and come back on a murder charge. It really wasn't about the money at all to me. No amount of money could replace the years I had done in prison for being loyal to people who were completely disloyal to me. I had reached a point in my life that I was willing to let the shit go. I felt that I had to in order to move on with my life. He ended up agreeing to my terms and sent me the little lump sum of money. To my own surprise, the last time we spoke, when I had my cell phone on the SHU, I told him I was glad he never came to prison and was out there taking care of his kids as he was supposed to do. I could tell that I had grown a lot from telling him that, but I actually meant it. I didn't even want someone who had been my enemy to have experienced all the bullshit I had gone through over the years of prison. Fuck. Shit, we had to break the cycle at some point. The fact that he was going on with his own with his kids, I could at least respect that, even though I no longer had respect for him as a person. I know, Shango yelled over the range. I was glad they moved my guy Shango on the range with me. I first met him when I was at Michigan City. We were cool then, but when we ran back into each other in the SHU, our friendship had reached a new level. Anytime we had weed, we would send some smoke and some vice versa. I don't remember that song had inspired him to start saying, I know all the song. I don't know what song it had inspired him to start saying, I know all the time, but that was just an inside joke, initially to come to our code words for smoking weed. Anytime I heard him yell that over the range, I knew he wanted me to pop my light socket and send him a wig down. He would already have a Cadillac sitting right in front of my cell door, so he could reel his car back down to his cell once I had lit the wick to it. As much of a gangster as he was, it tickled me that he was scared to pop his own light socket in order to get a light for joints himself. I didn't mind though. I had popped so many light sockets throughout my bit that I knew how to do it without shocking myself or blowing out the power in myself. He and I would dialogue over the range a lot. He was one of the most well-read brothers I had come across in prison. Anytime he finished one of my books in my library, he would have me send me another one. Although I was a number of years younger than him, he viewed me as a member of sorts, as a mentor of sorts. I remember when I first introduced him to the science of evolution and atheism, two subjects I'm sure he would never come to accept. We ended up talking about those two subjects for hours. I think one of the reasons he respected me so much was that I had opened his eyes to a number of topics he may never have considered if it wasn't for him crossing paths with me. Yeah, we would get high often together and laugh and joke about everything, but he and I could also talk about subjects that you couldn't have with just anybody. Brothers like Shango made the time I spent in the SHU easier to endure. I found a lot of meaning in helping others to answer those big questions of life. It also showed me that some sense of most hardcore gangsters, criminals, and convicts were just as capable as anyone else to transform themselves and become intellectuals as well. In fact, it made me realize that Huey P. Newton was right about the lumproletariat class being essential to the vanguard party and the socialist revolution. Although many of us had been criminals throughout our lives, ones who had experienced firsthand police brutality, the, the dehumanization of their prisons, and the hopelessness at the bottom. Many of us had been students of guerrilla warfare in our own communities through gang warfare, living in the street life, or simply being rebels without a cause. That main difference between the criminal element and a person who transformed themselves into a revolutionary is political education. Once this class of brothers and sisters were given a revolutionary education, I realized that they would become the main backbone of any genuine revolutionary movement in this country. That section of our country is our army and fighting force. They just aren't aware of it yet. Instead of turning their guns against themselves, they must be aware of who their real enemy is. The fact that I had spent so much time on administrative and disciplinary segregation units allowed me the opportunity to run across a lot of gang leaders, hardcore criminals, stick 'em in, and the brazen elements in our community. Instead of trying to recruit all these brothers directly into the Black Guerrilla Circle, I started focusing on self-education in general. As long as they showed an interest in anything I was willing to talk about, I made sure I kept one of my books in their hand. It didn't necessarily matter which subject they were most interested in. If they were interested in studying religion, I had a number of books I would give them. If they were interested in studying philosophy, I kept books on that. If they were interested in studying the original Black Panther Party, I kept books like Huey P. Newton Reader, edited by David Hillard, George Jackson, Soledad Brothers, and many other books on the Panthers on hand. If they really wanted to deepen their political education, I kept books by Mao Zedong, Lenin, Karl Marx in my library as well. As long as I was on the range with some brothers who wanted to learn, I was right there to provide them with the reading materials in which they could. The biggest mistake for the person was putting me in a situation where I not only could deepen my own studies, but also reach that hardcore element, which was my main largest audience always. It was the ones that the system considered the worst of the worst. Those were the ones that I knew we had to teach in order for us to have any chance at revolution in a country like the US. The sacrifices that we were willing to die for in the streets over nonsense had to become the sacrifices that would be willing to make for the revolution. Besides, it's this section of community who everyone wanted to be like in the streets. They had the ability to reach in the community that had straight-laced community members that couldn't be reached. Once we won this demographic over, we had a chance to win over the streets to the revolution. That's very true. At least in my opinion, most of the strongest revolutionaries have always been ex-gangbangers and so forth, at least in my opinion. And I'm just reading some comments here. Like Sister Veronica says, they did the same thing to our Chinese brothers and sisters out in Crystal City, Texas, in terms of segregation and oppression. And continuing reading, it says, the most exemplified by my relationship with my main man, Quinn Reynolds, aka Black. We ran into each other again on the SHU on D East as well. I hadn't seen him since we had first co-founded the BGC, the Black Guerrilla Circle of Michigan City. At the time, he was drifting towards the teachings of the Moorish Science Temple, yet he was still the Black Panther type of shit. Like Shango, every time I was around him, he poured through my library like a man with an appetite he couldn't be satiated. He ended up embracing the theory of evolution and atheism just like myself. We discussed bringing a guerrilla style self education approach to the brothers in prison. At the time, we were following the political line of Bob Avakian and the Revolutionary Communist Party. They would often publish the articles that we wrote for their newspaper Revolution. The prisons in Indiana normally let their books in, but a number of prisons started to ban books by the original Black Panther Party, Malcolm X, Frantz Fanon, or even MLK. That tells you why they really felt. That tells you what they really felt about Black history, if it's viewed by a lot of prisons as a quote unquote threat to security. That's interesting. I didn't realize that because, there's that whole movement in a lot of red states in terms of like critical race theory and so forth, where they're banning books. I didn't know that about certain prison systems. I mean, it's sad to say it makes sense, but I didn't realize that certain prison systems would do that. Years later, when Black was released from prison in 2020, he died of an overdose of heroin. His death truly devastated me. There was no other revolutionary I had imbued myself into like I had done with him. He was my Bobby Seale part on the war of drugs, was to rob our communities of our best and brightest potentials. Black was definitely one of them. Rest in power, comrade. This is one of the reasons why I understood the importance of Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. The United States also knows how important it is to keep the section of community from becoming revolutionaries or even getting revolutionaries hooked on drugs. No matter how much they claim to be against the crime of violence in our communities, they would rather we remain criminals than to become like the MLKs, Malcolms, Huey P. Newtons, George Jacksons, Asada Shakurs, or Fred Hamptons. This was the true motivation behind the so-called quote unquote war on drugs. When Michelle Alexander so elegantly pointed out in her eye-opening book she wrote, and I quote, the nature of the criminal justice system has changed. It is no longer primarily concerned with the prevention and punishment of crime, but rather the management and control of the dispossessed. H.R. Hademan, who was once the senior advisor to the Nixon administration, wrote in his diaries that Alexander includes in her book that, quote, President Nixon, emphasized that you have to face the fact that the whole problem is really the blacks. The key is to devise a system that recognizes this while not appearing to. Gosh. This is how the war on drugs was born. In her book, she illustrated how it was really a backlash against the civil rights movement and Black liberation movement in the 60s and 70s. The uprisings and movements they gave birth to made the US government terrible. She didn't talk much about this part of the history except as a footnote, but I was aware of the story about the big time drug dealer Freeway Rick Ross from watching a number of documentaries about his rise in the drug game. Since Nixon was bogged down in his impeachment, it wasn't until 1982 under Ronald Reagan's presidency that the Republicans were able to roll out this counterinsurgency plan that had originally designed under the Nixon regime. At this time in the country's history, drug crime was actually down and not a major problem when Reagan declared, quote unquote, the war on drugs. I'm going to stop right there really quick because that's very interesting because being a kid in the 80s myself, I remember the DARE program. I remember, gosh, what was that stupid dog? McGruff, right? Say no to crime, all that. And I remember thinking, I was born and raised in a very poor part of El Paso, which is literally right there on the border. And I remember thinking, like, there's no drug problem. Like, we go into Juarez all the time. I go to Second Ward, Segundo Barrio all the time. Like, I don't understand. And then literally, I can remember as a little kid, after being taught all this in school, then Miami Vice came on. And I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, so Miami, okay. And then, like, almost every show of Miami Vice, they were like chasing some drug dealer or whatever. Then I remember my old grandpa, my abuelito, watching, gosh, was it, I forgot what famous news actor. I don't think it was Walter Cronkite or something. And they were talking about the war on drugs and how eventually it was going to come up from Mexico. It was going to come up from Colombia and it was going to come up from Mexico. And we would cross into Ciudad Juarez all the time. Like there was nothing. There was nothing. And then, years later, come to find out, slowly in the 80s, it started impacting through the crack pandemic, Black and brown communities. And then in the 90s, that whole narco cultura just literally took off. And then I myself have seen documentaries and read books where the CIA legitimately was responsible. And everybody knows that the CIA and the FBI, they were all Nixon's right-hand man until he started getting impeached, and then they all turned his back on him. So it's very interesting how there's a little bit of historic background here in terms of the war on drugs. This part I did not know. But it was never really about drugs being a problem or the way they intended or not. They needed a way to target the Black and brown population for mass incarceration in order to preempt it from rising up like it did in the 60s. If black and brown men were incarcerated for selling drugs or strung out by using them, that would destabilize black and brown communities. How can a population who has lost its warriors to prison and drug addiction rise up and challenge the system effectively? This was the rationale behind this policy. Plus, it gave them justification to beef up and militarize their police force across the country in order to fight this so called war. Police departments across the US saw an exponential rise in not only their recruitment, but also their budgets. That's very true. The fact that drug crime was low, as we know from the Freeway Rick Ross story, the CIA made this war on drugs appear real by importing cocaine into the US. They used it as a Nicaraguan guy by the name of Danilo Blandon as Freeway's middleman. This served the U.S. interests on two fronts. The money they were able to amass from flooding black and brown communities with crack cocaine, they were able to fund the war waging against democratically elected governments in Nicaragua under Daniel Ortega. They wanted us to oust him. In the US, they enabled them to carry out their domestic policy of mass incarceration. The war on drugs was the perfect cover to carry out their counterinsurgents against the black and brown communities that H.R. Heidemann said must do so without appearing to do so. After I read Michelle Alexander's book and watched a number of documentaries about Freeway Rick Ross, I realized just how Machiavellian this government truly is. I wanted to open up the eyes of the brothers that were in prison with me, so I pushed that book hard when I was in prison. I figured if brothers knew how they were playing us as pawns, and maybe when they get out of prison, even if they didn't get to the revolution, they might at least not go back to their community selling drugs or doing the work for them. I remember I remember also seeing a documentary on black market, black operation budgets. And I remember, if you can remember, when was it? Operation Desert Storm or Iraqi Freedom? One of those in the early 90s. There was a new airplane that came out, and it was the stealth fighter and the stealth bomber. Nobody knew what it was. They didn't even know where it came from. The CIA said, "Oh yeah, we've been planning this for many years." Well, where did they get that money, right? Um, Almost every budget has to be appropriated by Congress. And I remember hearing a report, and oddly enough, this was around the same time as Oliver North, where there were certain millions and trillions of dollars that were not appropriated for by Congress. And the stealth fighter and the stealth bomber came out of that. My question is, where did they get the money? So that happened in the early 90s, and we're talking about crack in the 80s. I could almost swear it was from that. Sister Veronica Rafa, take care. I will go ahead and continue. And this will obviously will be recorded as well too, so you can go back to it. When I hear people demonize the young black men in our communities for living the lives they had lived before they went away to prison, I pointed out the true objective of this so-called war on drugs. They initiated to target our communities. Those that rule over this country are experts of sociology, population control techniques, and shaping public opinion. I often use the example of Frankenstein and the doctor who had created Frankenstein. I would ask people who was the biggest threat. Was it the doctor or Frankenstein? They would normally think about that for a second and conclude that the doctor was the biggest threat since it was he who had given Frankenstein life. Well, it was the same with the brothers and sisters who had lost themselves in the drug game. It was the US government who created this Frankenstein in order to devise a way to prevent black population from pursuing black liberation. It was a way to arrest their development before they could come to see the new MLKs, Malcolms, Huey P. Newtons, Assata Shakurs, George Jacksons, and Fred Hamptons and themselves. That form of consciousness was seen as a bigger threat. So they made sure we chose the life of gangsters and drug dealers over a revolutionary life instead. By flooding our communities with drugs and then looking many of us away when we chose that and chased the American dream, that was readily available to us in our communities as an American nightmare. They didn't make it. They didn't make us turn to drugs, they may claim. But when you take all the meaningful opportunities out of our communities and you assassinate all of our real leaders who were trying to build unity, and solidarity in our communities, what do you expect? What obviously is the outcome, right? Again, they are masters of sociology and population control. They knew what the outcome would be. For 7 years, I was on the SHU. It was my studies and self-education that kept my mind strong and able to resist going crazy. Yeah, I endured a number of bouts of depression, but I always found a way to bounce back. I figured the best way to bounce back at them was sending me to the SHU for all those years unjustly was to emerge equipped with a political education and knowledge that would enable me to fight Black liberation fearlessly. It was all the time I had spent on the SHU that transformed me into the person I am today. And that is chapter 20. And you know what's interesting is I'm of that generation that came from the 80s and 90s of revolutionary gangster rap, like that hardcore, very violent gangster rap. Like for those of us that are, in our late 40s, early 50s, we can remember groups like South Central Cartel, Crucial Conflict. Well, they were more Midwest, but like DRS, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. Like there were like a lot of early rap groups that I remember watching videos, even early Ice Cube videos. And as a young Chicano in the Southwest and dressing in that cholo attire, seeing the videos and saying like, oh, damn, a lot of these gangster rappers dress like me. And if you look at like the movie Colors, for example, there were a lot of black and brown interracial gangs, especially in California. When I left the Southwest for California and then ended up here in Oregon in the late 90s, I remember Southwest, we were mainly Chicano gangs in the barrios. And it wasn't until I was exposed to the music, obviously through gangster rap, and I saw that in California. I was like, damn, it literally is like the movie Colors, right? And then, fast forward, I'm living here in Oregon. My first wife was African American. We raised kids and so forth. And then, we went our separate ways. And then something very interesting happened like in the 2000s and so forth. And there was a lot of conflict between black and brown. And I remember not understanding that because I had grown up with that. And I remember thinking that is like a form of some sort of social control. Like they don't want that to happen. Unfortunately, I have family that are, incarcerated. And so just like the brother kind of alluded to in the book, it seems as if in the history of incarceration that they do that. They segregate the masses, right? And so I remember having family members that said, well, maybe it came from the inside. There were a couple of riots, people didn't get along, and now it's filtering to the little homies on the outside. But as an older person, I remember thinking, well, but like my kids are literally mixed, and that's like I remember even having homeboys in certain cliques that were black and so forth, or even me being in some black cliques, like they would call me Cheyenne or something, like you know what I mean? Like that didn't make sense to me. And then now you see that coming back around again and you see more unity. And then it's even more refreshing on the revolutionary side to see people like the Panthers, like the Young Lords, like the Brown Berets, especially for me, the Brown Berets and the Panthers come together and have the younger generation see that. It's really refreshing. What's also interesting in this chapter, I think, is how the brother really laid out capitalism and how this country really is so super shady. Not that we didn't know that already, but I mean, it kind of spells it out in terms of like historical references to like Adam Smith and so forth, right? Anyways, you guys, we are at time. Does anybody have anything that they want to say in closing before we close this off? I think this is one of my favorite chapters, to be honest with you.
This is your favorite point, right?
Yeah, man, because like, to you and I, it's evident.
You spoke of the lumpins, man, and I remember, man, you spoke of the lumpins, and I remember back in the days, man, when I was a young, well, I still am a young lord, but when I was a younger young lord, let me say it like that. I consider myself a lumping proletariat, man, because we used to say, Marx talked about the lumpers. Everybody in here is a lumper. I used to tell people, because I was a chairman, I said, everybody here is a lumper. And you're going to prove to me you're a lumper. How am I going to prove it to you, Chair? I said, because you're going to try to steal something, man. Lumpers always stealing. Or you're gonna act stupid and you're gonna get nasty, because I used to raise my voice sometimes at them, man, because I had to, and they say, Che, you too much, man, bro. I say, hey, here's that lumper coming out of you. Here's that lumper. But I grew out of that, man, because lumping actually, man, is yeah, it's street people. And I'm, and I can't say that I grew out of that, because when you look at the Panthers, when you look at the Black Panther Party, many of them came out of the streets. I mean, well, you can't say that too much about the Young Lost, man, because they were all students.
Yeah,
They were
true.
all students, they were all students. The leadership of the party, the initial people, man, were all students, but yeah.
It's funny how things come around full circle. You could lead that life of a I don't want to say criminal or thug or whatever, but because of certain opportunities, certain people have to do certain things.
Yeah.
And then, if you ever provided the means to awake in yourself, to be self-aware and self-educate, like unfortunately, prison was that means for Brother Kwame to become self-aware. Other things happen with others. I think honestly for me, if it wasn't moving to a very predominantly white state with very few Chicanos and trying to rediscover myself, that was the means that gave me to become more revolutionary. And then as I got more involved in politics, and I'm hearing my kids on the bus, they're talking about, Dad, what is building the wall and this and that. I was like, no, hell no, and trying to get more involved. I think at some point you go from that thug mentality, that G mentality, and then you start becoming self-aware, right? And you're like, man, like this ain't it. Instead of trying to rob my brother, I should be trying to help educate him so that we could rob the system.
I was my first son, when I came out here, my first son, I named, what I named him? I named him Che Aguevana Guarionex. And to, he used to tell me, well, why you name me Guarionex? Who the hell is that? I said, man, that used to be I used to explain it. That used to be a cacique in Puerto Rico, and Che Aguevana Guarionex. Guarionex used to be also a cacique, but they had cacique 1 and cacique 2. I prefer cacique 2 because cacique 1 was too lenient with the people that came over, the Europeans. He was too lenient. That's why they did what they did, because he was pacifier, man. But cacique, right the next 2, man, he was a rebel, man. he was what we call lumping.
And actually, in the comments, Brother Kwame, I stand corrected. He was right. The original Unilones de Chicano were gang leaders that turned revolutionaries, and then in Nueva York, it looks like they were more estudiantes that turned revolutionary.
Yeah,
combination of the two or so forth, right? Ralphie, were you gonna say something, brother?
Is Ralphie a young lord?
No,
Brown
I'm
Beret.
actually Brown Beret.
Brown Beret? Oh, okay.
2009, yeah. Me and Lobo are part of La Mesa Nacional, and it's the first successful coalition of brown berets nationwide that has not just upheld a program of socialism and revolutionary thought for Chicanos, and also recognizing our indigenous background as brown berets, but also a united, coalition of brown berets who have held it together. And we work with a lot of the young lords, especially the younger ones today, and we work with a lot of other groups, including our Black brothers and sisters, AIM, etc. So yeah, we do a lot of work in the community, but I'm more of an advisor today, but I'm still a brown beret. I am still like you. I'm a brown beret. So I'm still there. And Lobo is represents us in Oregon. He's been doing
you said I messed up, right? then you know Connie.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I know. Yeah. I know Connie. Oh yeah.
That's
She
my
helped
sister.
form La Mesa. She was actually a founding member of La Mesa.
Yeah, that's my sister,
Yeah,
man. That's a
We have
hell
a,
of
we're fortunate because in La Mesa we have a lot of strong brown sisters that they help keep us strong. Like we're blessed. We have some I mean, almost all the Berets, if not all, they're trustworthy and revolutionary comrades. But of all, I'm really impressed by our sisters. Like every time we have Mesa meetings, I'm always learning something from the sisters. They either teach me something or they say something, and I'm like, damn, that's like a
yeah.
different train of thought. You know, they make
Yeah,
you think
yeah.
about stuff. You know.
You know,
Yeah.
and all I was gonna say was this is an awesome chapter because I think it goes into the learning that goes where you have nothing but time and how Kwame used it wisely, right? To and over time develops and he evolves and he meets all these people. And I appreciate your comments, Chad, because a lot of your history and your experience, that's the kind of leadership and guidance I know that we need out here. You know, I'm 54 and I know I'm much older than a lot of the young brown berets who are out there organizing too. But man, with the wealth of knowledge that we have, and say we put it together with somebody like Kwame coming out of prison, writing this book, getting this program together, I think we can change things, or at least start to on a level maybe that hasn't been seen in a while. So definitely thank you for your comments and your input today, Chad, because I always like these study groups, and sometimes I'm simply listening in because I'm doing all these other things, but tonight was awesome.
That's how we learn, brother. That's how we learn. We learn, man, by listening and talking. If we don't talk, we don't get nothing.
Oh yeah.
That's
And
right.
listen, you gotta listen too.
And you gotta listen too.
Oh yeah.
Shit.
But yeah,
Okay.
thank y'all. It's great seeing y'all. I'm gonna have to log out, but
Yeah,
me-
thank you guys. Thank you guys. I think we'll go ahead and call it for tonight. And on that note, we'll end it with all power to the people.
All power to the people.
all
Take
power to
care.
the people.
Much
All
love,
power to
man.
the
Much
people.
love.
Thank you guys.
Heading out.